Bonjour à tous, welcome everybody. It's now time to start the joint webinar between the European Parliament and the FOPEMIL initiative. I will let the floor now for the introduction to Mr. Pascal Canfin.
Hello to everybody. Je voudrais commencer par remercier l'initiative 4 pour 1000 pour participer à ce séminaire et m'avoir contribué à le co-organiser. Je voulais également remercier Robert Linz pour sa contribution à cet échange. C'est très important que la commission Agri du Parlement européen et la commission environnement de ce Parlement travaillent ensemble. On l'a fait en bonne intelligence sur la politique agricole commune et nous avons, je pense, un résultat satisfaisant. Et nous allons continuer à le faire sur d'autres sujets, des sujets commerciaux qu'on n'abordera pas ici, mais aussi sur le sujet qui est le cœur de l'échange d'aujourd'hui, à savoir ce qu'on appelle en bon français le carbon farming. Je pense qu'on est face à un moment très important parce que notre objectif avec ce travail sur le carbon farming, c'est de réunir deux objectifs qui parfois sont contradictoires, à savoir à la fois stocker davantage de carbone dans les sols, transformer les pratiques agricoles pour y arriver et augmenter le revenu des agriculteurs en faisant en sorte que aujourd'hui le service qu'ils rendent gratuitement soit rémunéré demain. Et en faisant cela, en tout cas, si on le fait bien, normalement, on crée un cercle vertueux qui crée de la dynamique de changement dans les exploitations sur les territoires, puisque ça devient l'intérêt de l'agriculteur de modifier ses pratiques et évidemment, c'est bon pour le climat, on y reviendra, c'est l'hypothèse de base de ce séminaire. Je remercie les différents participants et les différents panélistes que je présenterai après les propos introductifs. I will switch to English for a second. So I will give you the floor for a couple of minutes to give your introductory remarks, and then I will give the floor to Stéphane Le Foll, the chairman of the initiative 4 pour 1000. And as you probably know, we will switch between French and English all over the seminar. So you have the translation available easily from Zoom. So the floor is yours to start with, Norbert, from the Agri-Community perspective.
Comité de l'agriculture et le développement rural. Merci beaucoup, Pascal.
Good afternoon to you and to the participants of this webinar. Thanks very much to 4 pour 1000 for having the idea for this webinar and for the organization. I think this comes timely right after the summer break, before our discussions will start in our committees. And with committees, I mean the ENVI and the Agri committee of the European Parliament. As Pascal rightly said, we had a cooperation when it came to the CAP, and we will go on with this cooperation when it comes to this specific topic of carbon farming, and when it comes to the whole Fit for 55 package, especially the LULUCF part. And I think we all agree on the fact that agriculture has to do its fair share for more climate and environmental protection. But what is also clear, that agriculture is the only sector which sequesters CO2 naturally. And the climate goals for 2030 and 2050, I'm sure that they will only be possible with a regulatory framework which incentivize carbon removals. And as legislators, we have to think about the right incentives for the farmers in the European Union to improve their farming practices. That's what Pascal already said. And we have to develop a carbon farming scheme. And I'm convinced that the new CAP already gives the first incentives with the so-called eco schemes, and the agri-environmental measures in the second pillar. But today we are talking about further incentives, like, therefore, I think I have to welcome the LULUCF proposal by the Commission because it will help the sector to become climate neutral in 2035, and carbon farming will play a huge role there if we design it correctly. And this is the topic we have to discuss today. But for me, three things are clear, and I'm looking forward to discussing this with you today. In general, a successful carbon market needs private and institutional public actors, because growers need additional incentives for sequestering carbon. As the necessary transition to regenerative agriculture for humus conservation, building carbon sequestration may involve costs and investments. The eco schemes in the CAP post 2020 are already going in the right direction, but I'm sure, as I said it before, additional incentives from high quality private programs are needed. And the second, carbon sequestration must be measurable and verifiable. Therefore, a legal framework should include high quality carbon farming programs that can guarantee verifiable carbon credits. And the third and final, I am of the opinion that not all carbon programs are the same. Some certify the process rather than the outcome, to give a long-term confidence for those investing or buying agriculture carbon credits. A regulatory framework, I repeat myself, which ensures realness, additionality, no double counting, and permanence, in my view, is essential. I'm looking forward to getting some action and to work together on this comprehensive package. I thank you very much to be invited to this seminar. So with this, I give back to Pascal. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. Thank you very much. Your introductory remarks. And of course, we will go much more into the details of that with the panelists. Je vais maintenant revenir au français et présenter Stéphane Le Foll. Stéphane, ravi de t'avoir avec nous aujourd'hui. Tu présides l'initiative 4 pour 1000. Tu es entre autres ancien ministre de l'Agriculture en France et tu as été très actif au moment de la COP21, l'accord de Paris sur le climat, pour justement lancer cette initiative, cette conversation mondiale et multiplier les initiatives et faire levier. Et c'est l'objectif de 4 pour 1000. Je suis ravi que remarque d'introduction avant de passer au panel.
Merci Pascal. Ça fait plaisir de retrouver la commission agricole, dont j'ai été vice-président fut un temps au Parlement européen, il y a bien longtemps. Il y a un vice-président aussi d'un parti social-démocrate qui, à l'époque, pesait un peu plus que ce qu'il pèse aujourd'hui. Mais bon, après, tout ça, tu as rappelé la COP21, et vous avez rappelé les enjeux du carbone dans les sols. L'initiative que j'avais lancée en 2015 visait à sortir uniquement l'agriculture d'un problème pour la lutte dans le réchauffement climatique.
From a problem into a part of the solution for the climate. And in that part of the solution,
il y a bien sûr les grands enjeux alimentaires, les grands enjeux de la biodiversité. Il y avait une vidéoconférence hier à Marseille qui était très intéressante. Et en même temps, une capacité que l'agriculture peut avoir, si on s'en donne les moyens, de stocker une partie du carbone de l'air via la photosynthèse. C'était ça l'objectif. Cet objectif partait d'une étude qui avait été faite il y a 15-20 ans par l'INRA sur un calcul qui visait à faire un rapport entre le total du stock de carbone dans les sols à l'échelle de la planète et qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait y rajouter pour pouvoir absorber la totalité des émissions de des gaz carbonés émis par les activités anthropiques. 4 grammes sur 1000 grammes, c'était ça le principe. Et on a choisi, à partir de là, de garder cet indice comme un slogan pour pouvoir engager le débat sur le stockage de carbone. C'est comme ça que cette initiative est née. Elle est aujourd'hui une des initiatives qui reste de la COP21, Pascal, ça c'est très important, puisque au départ, il y avait 160 pays. Aujourd'hui, on est à près de 650 partenaires et 300 membres qui regroupent des pays, des institutions, des ONG bien sûr, et qui regroupent aussi dans le consortium des partenaires privés qui souhaitent s'investir dans cette démarche à l'échelle de la planète. L'Europe a fait des choix très importants sur le New Green Deal et sur les enjeux de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique avec des objectifs ambitieux qui, à l'échelle du monde, nous mettent dans les plus ambitieux. C'est un choix qui est fait pour lutter contre le réchauffement climatique et est exemplaire. Et on doit aussi le transformer en un choix qui soit un choix économique et qui mette l'Europe et l'ensemble des pays européens en avance sur les autres pays du monde. L'agriculture est au cœur de ce débat. Et vous discutez aujourd'hui au niveau européen des crédits carbone, des quotas carbone. Ce qu'on veut dire au travers de notre initiative, c'est qu'on pense qu'une part des rémunérations supplémentaires, ça a été dit tout à l'heure par le représentant de la Commission, une part doit pouvoir être aussi liée en intégrant l'agriculture dans cette dynamique des crédits carbone, à condition, bien sûr, ça a été rappelé aussi par la Commission, l'impact ou l'engagement de l'agriculture puisse être des capacités de stockage de carbone qu'ont les sols européens et les sols mondiaux. Et on a d'ailleurs travaillé au niveau du Cap pour l'huile sur plusieurs hypothèses, en particulier de lier des grandes régions européennes avec des régions d'Afrique pour essayer de voir comment les surfaces disponibles à l'échelle de la planète pourraient permettre, par une coopération de développement, de développer ces stratégies que vous avez là sur les images, des stratégies de stockage de carbone dans les sols. Le stockage, c'est d'abord de la matière organique, et la matière organique, c'est ce qui permet d'avoir une qualité des sols qui permettent d'avoir des rendements importants. Donc, on est bien dans la combinaison entre la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique et la fertilité des sols. C'est aussi ça l'enjeu de l'initiative, essayer de faire comprendre qu'il n'y a pas d'antagonisme entre la dimension économique, productive et la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique. Il y aurait même au contraire un intérêt certain à organiser les productions agricoles de manière différente pour bénéficier des avantages de la matière organique et en même temps stocker du carbone et lutter contre le réchauffement climatique. C'est pour ça qu'on insiste beaucoup pour que l'agriculture puisse être intégrée dans toute la réflexion qui est en cours, et ça c'est un point important. On s'appuie sur l'agroécologie. Pourquoi l'agroécologie? Parce qu'on cherche d'abord à trouver dans chaque écosystème et système pédoclimatique l'optimisation de ce que nous donne d'abord la nature avant d'être des utilisateurs de chimie, de machines et d'amendements, comme c'est indiqué ici sur ce schéma. Mais par définition, l'agroécologie, dans sa conception, elle est d'abord à adapter à chacune des conditions pédoclimatiques. Donc, il n'y a pas un système qui va s'imposer, il y a énormément de systèmes différents. Si je prends pour l'Europe, entre une agriculture méditerranéenne et l'agriculture du nord de l'Europe, la grande plaine nord-européenne, il y a des situations pédoclimatiques qui sont complètement différentes et dont il faut tenir compte pour pouvoir gérer cette dynamique productive et en même temps permettant de lutter contre le réchauffement climatique. C'est ce qui nous amène aussi, et ce qui nous a amené,
This is what has led us And I will give the floor to the researchers in a moment. But this is
et surtout des buts d'abord et des objectifs ensuite. On a fixé 6 grands buts partagés qui définissent ensuite des objectifs pour essayer de faire en sorte qu'on combine, vous le voyez ici, l'ensemble du complexe agricole, transformation, politique et politique publique, scientifique et organisation internationale. Ce que l'on souhaite au travers de ce plan stratégique, c'est d'essayer de mettre en capacité de proposer des itinéraires techniques qui permettent, dans chaque écosystème, d'avoir l'objectif de stockage de carbone. Je reviens tout à l'heure à ce que disait le représentant de la Commission, il faut que ça soit mesurable. Pour que ça soit mesurable, il faut qu'il y ait des itinéraires techniques. Ça s'inscrit aussi, ça a été rappelé, dans le temps. Ça ne se fera pas simplement en quelques mois, c'est sur plusieurs années, mais il faut qu'il y ait un cadre qui nous permette d'avancer dans ce domaine, car c'est un point essentiel dans l'atténuation du carbone dans l'atmosphère. On voit les débats réels du carbone, j'ai regardé, j'ai vu, hein, il y a des choses tout à fait intéressantes, mais la photosynthèse, la forêt et l'agriculture, à mon sens, sont des premiers éléments sur lesquels on doit s'appuyer pour pouvoir atténuer le niveau de carbone dans l'atmosphère. Ce plan stratégique a des principes généraux, mais il a aussi des objectifs plus techniques et plus précis. C'est ça qu'on veut faire partager. On souhaite vraiment, à partir de là, dans cette présentation générale, partager avec vous cette ambition collective. Je sais qu'elle est largement aujourd'hui comprise, qu'elle a fait l'objet de beaucoup de discussions, qu'on sera présent aussi à la COP26 à Glasgow, qu'on a envie vraiment de faire passer ce message. On doit être des acteurs tous ensemble, à la fois de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique, de la santé des sols, donc de la biodiversité, parce qu'il faut savoir que dans les sols, la biomasse organique est bien plus importante que celle qu'il y a sur la Terre. Et c'est un enjeu de biodiversité.
Parfait.
Et voilà ce que je voulais dire. J'ai dû dépasser un tout petit peu, mais comme il y avait beaucoup de diapos, je vous remercie beaucoup en tout cas de m'avoir écouté sagement.
Parfait, merci Stéphane. Si vous avez des questions, mais évidemment, vous pouvez. So I will switch to English. So the way it's going to be organized now, we have 2 panels. The first one, I would say, will.
Alors, nous avons 2 panels. Le premier va travailler sur les.
Let's say on the regulatory and the policy side. Because that's why this seminar is timely, because we expect before the end of this year the first political something, guidelines, framework, whatever. It will be detailed by the Commission, and then the legislative proposal will come later. And we're going to have a second panel with solution providers, because it's important to have both the vision, the policy tools, the right framework, and of course, concrete solution providers on the ground, on the market, in the farms, so that we can deliver on our objectives. And I think we are exactly at the time where all of that could be put together to scale up the storage of carbon in our soils. So we are going to move to the first panel, and starting with the European Commission, DG Climat. I welcome Christian Holzeitner. So you are probably the best placed person in Europe to talk about what we could expect from the Commission in the next weeks and months on this carbon farming initiative. Then we are going to have Claire Chenu from INRAE, Anne Trombini from Pour une agriculture vivante, and Margaret Kim from Gold Standard, and I will detail the angles of the next panelists. So let's start with you, Christian, for 7 minutes.
Okay, thanks so much, Pascal, for the very nice introduction. Good afternoon. Very happy to be with you and to quickly talk about where we stand in the Commission with our considerations. Let me first recall our big target for 2050. This is we want to be climate neutral. We want to be the first climate neutral economy in the world. And of course, for this, we need to reduce the use of fossil fuels. No question about that. That's the first measure we need to take. But we also need to increase the intake of CO2, the storage in our soils, in our forests. Because if you think about climate policy in 2050, it will be very much about the bioeconomy. We will still have emissions from the production of food, from the production of bioenergy, from biomass. We'll need more biomass, for example, for the production of textiles, and so on. So there will be emissions in the system, and that we need to balance by the increased storage of CO2 in soils, in forests, in long-lived wood products, like, for example, woody construction material. And of course, we'll also need to look at technological solutions, like, for example, thinking when we produce materials with biomass, that we think about carbon capture and storage, so that we get the CO2 out there. So both solutions are very much related. And it's very encouraging that we see so many initiatives on carbon farming, both from the public side, from the private side, trying out new ways of rewarding those farmers and foresters that do it more climate friendly, that try to produce biomass and food at the same time as storing more CO2 in the soils, in the forests. And what we want to do now is we want to take these initiatives, take the lessons learned from them, and upscale them. I think, Monsieur Caffin, you said before, it's upscaling, and I think this is very much the right word. What do we want to do? What do we want to do with the policy communication that we are planning for end of December? And here are the elements that we want to consider. Of course, first, the finance. From where does the money come to reward better climate-friendly farmers and foresters? So we are already, with EU funds, like with the LIFE program, we are already financing pilot projects on carbon farming. There will be the soil mission under Horizon Europe, which will be like really a good pot of money to better understand the monitoring, reporting, verification of the removals in ecosystems. So we should really use this one. Then, of course, it's about the bigger rollout of carbon farming with the support of the Common Agricultural Policy. And now it's a key moment where member states submit their strategic plans for the eco schemes, but also for rural development intervention, that there are already plans for putting in carbon farming. And then lastly, I think what is also important is the review of the state aid guidelines for agriculture and forestry. And there we must also have a look that these result-oriented payments that we want to do with carbon farming, so that we can really measure the stored CO2 and pay a price for that, are also possible under the state aid interest from the private side. Be it the large food producers that are keen to say, okay, I'm climate neutral, so the production of my food doesn't have negative impacts on the environment. We also have, I think, potential demand from outside the land sector. Let's think, for example, about aviation. There is the carbon market on international aviation that is called CORSIA. So there we would have an immediate demand, an immediate market for carbon removal credits from Europe. We should go into this. And of course, what we also want to start to be thinking of is the long-term perspective. Until 2050, how can we integrate carbon removals, the land sector, better in our regulated carbon markets? And this communication should be a start on this reflection. So that was a bit more the demand side. But equally, we need to work on the supply side. We need to have common standards on how we define, how we certify carbon removals, and that's something very important. But this is, I think, something what we are good at the Commission, is to create European standards. So we are thinking about setting up an expert group, learning about all the examples that we have in Europe. I think also particular in France with the label Bas Carbone. I think we can build very much on this experience, and also make it easier for farmers to take these initiatives up. And I think it's not only farmers, it's the regional authorities. There are many stakeholders involved in setting up a carbon farming scheme. I think this is something we learned from the projects we looked at. So advice is very important, because you need to know what you can do on your parcel of the land. It's not that you can do the same thing everywhere. So digital solutions, understanding the fertility of the soil, what you can do with your forest, which types of tree you can plant there, is so important. So the information, the building up of all of this, I think will be key. And for example, there you could look into kind of public-private partnerships. A lot of the initial investment could, for example, be financed by the rural development interventions, and then you get an additional income from selling these credits on private markets. Then going a little bit more into the technical things, really into the certification. And this will be then probably more for the legislative proposal on carbon removal certification, with which we want to hope to follow up in 22-23, is how exactly to define a carbon removal credit, 1 ton of CO2. So there are the questions related to permanence. How do we handle that risk? We will have natural disturbances. This is nature. We will have more extreme weather events. Who should have the risk from that? How do you share this between the farmers and the buyer of the carbon credit? So I think there are different possibilities on the risk sharing. Then, of course, the additionality. So I think what we see from the voluntary carbon markets, buyers are in particular interested in high quality carbon removal. So that this is really something that is additional to the state of play. Also looking into co-benefits of biodiversity. So we see a lot of demand, like really also for regional solutions in Europe. So this is something I hear quite often, that also the ones who buy then the credits would like to see what's happening there. How is this CO2 removed? So I think there is to be had a discussion. Okay, which type of carbon removals do we want? How permanent? How additional? Also that we can offer a fair revenue to those who are going into these new markets.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we start entering into I would say the technicalities, but actually the concrete questions we have to face, and then to find answers to. And as you said, we can build on a couple of already existing experiments and concrete cases on the ground in France and elsewhere in Europe. And that's why I will be happy now to give the floor to the 2 other panelists before going to the gold standard, focusing on certification. And I will switch back to French. Je vais donner la parole à Claire Chenu de l'INRAE. L'INRAE est probablement l'un des instituts de recherche publics en Europe qui travaille le plus sur la question du carbon farming et du stockage. Et on a effectivement en France le label Bas Carbone. Donc, je serais ravi d'avoir votre vision des choses sur les leçons, les premières leçons que l'on peut déjà tirer de ces expériences pour ensuite les transposer au niveau européen dans les prochains mois, comme cela vient d'être dit. Claire, la parole est à toi.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm very pleased, merci Pascal, and I'm very pleased to participate to this event and discussion. So as Pascal said, I'm a soil scientist. I'm a specialist of soil organic matter, and I'm also a member of the scientific and technical committee of the 4 per Mil initiative, and I am the coordinator of the European Joint Program Soil. So in this program, research institutes and universities from 24 European countries are joining efforts towards climate smart, sustainable management of agricultural soils. So how to make carbon farming a success for climate, environment, and farmers? I will try to give you some insights from the scientist's point of view. And first, to remember that carbon farming, which is managing carbon pools, flows, and greenhouse gases at farm level to mitigate climate change, does concern indeed soil carbon. I will essentially talk about soil carbon, but not only. And it is as well as crucial to reduce nitrogen emissions as N2O with appropriate changes in practices. So a success for climate. So this is an example I'm showing you from France, where the technical potential for additional storage of carbon was estimated for mainland France. And what you can see, this is the graph, what you can see is that there's a diversity of options that can be chosen depending on the region, for example. And this, I think, is a strength for climate.
Pour la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Et toutes ces options de gestion, lorsqu'elles sont mises en application, peuvent constituer des solutions.
To 41% of our agricultural emissions. For Europe, Lughetto et al. Did a study where they estimated that it would correspond to 5 to 12% of European emissions. So you see, it's not the magic solution, but it is really part of the solution. There's a large technical potential. This is technical potential, what you can do when you apply in appropriate regions a given practice. Now, this has a cost, as was already said. And if you fix a ceiling to the cost of this implementation in terms of cost per ton of avoided or stored CO2 equivalent, you can see that the lower the ceiling, the lower is the economic potential. So, and in addition to this economic potential, we should consider the acceptance by farmers, how it relates to culture, to land tenure, or there are other factors, so that the actual potential is less. And then to be a success for climate, we need incentives, and carbon farming is potentially one incentive. Other considerations on climate. Here you see a schematic representation of carbon stocks over time with different management options. The one in brown is the baseline, and this is the baseline for cropland in Europe at present, slowly decreasing. Different possible management options and different messages I would like to convey. First, the priority, the absolute priority is to protect existing carbon stocks in peatland, in permanent grassland, in agriculture. Second, we need, and it was said, to quantify the additional soil organic carbon storage. That is, in addition to the baseline, there is uncertainty. We need to reduce the uncertainty in predicting through modeling, in measuring through methods for measuring, reporting, and verification. This is absolutely essential and is the basis of any results-based carbon farming scheme. And results-based carbon farming schemes have many interests. I think this will be discussed. Third, carbon storage is reversible if you go back to your initial management. And hence, it is necessary to ensure the permanence. And in addition, there is the question of changing climate, changing environment. And fourth, if you store additional carbon in one plot may result in storing less carbon in another plot. For example, if you move around manure across the landscape, hence it is important to be a success to avoid any leakage in the system. And this has to be considered in carbon farming. A third point about being a success, how to make it a success for climate. There is a need to establish a full greenhouse gas balance at the plot scale. And this is an example of assembling different meta-analyses where for different management options that store carbon, you can see it in red, there can be additional emissions of N2O. And these, in some cases, can even compensate, can even offset the additional carbon stored. So it's very important to always make the balance at the plot scale, but also for the whole suite of technical operations when you change management. Now, success for the environment. Well, soil organic matter contributes to ecosystem services and biodiversity, improving soil structure and then enhancing water infiltration, water retention, protecting soils from erosion. You see from my photographs, but also promoting, preserving and promoting biodiversity. So there's a need here to recognize these contributions that indirectly farmers make when they enter a carbon farming scheme to increase ecosystem services and biodiversity provided by soil, to recognize it and to value it. However, increasing soil organic carbon stocks, and Stéphane Le Foll said it, you can achieve it essentially by increasing the biomass inputs to soil. And for that, you need to increase the primary production. Well, increasing primary production may compromise the water resources, irrigation, the water quality, additional nutrients added, mineral nutrients, and the biodiversity, additional pesticides added. So it is essential to address those trade-offs, to always remain within the framework of agroecology and to protect natural resources. So success for the environment, but be careful with the trade-offs. And this has to be considered in the carbon farming scheme. Now, success for farmers. Well, I will be very biophysical and talk to you about yields. What you can see here on the left is a global relationship between soil organic carbon and yields for maize at the scale of the planet. And on the left, the same for wheat at the scale of China. It is well established that yields increase with soil organic carbon and then plateau. So there's a general advantage. And what you can see at the far right is that yield variation between years does decrease with soil organic carbon. And this is an indicator of weather, unexpected weather events, pests. So soil carbon tends to buffer those events and is actually a good indicator. Yield variation is actually a good indicator of adaptation to climate change. So there's a need here to improve the evaluation of co-benefits. Well, I would say that yields are a true benefit, not only a co-benefit, and behind to improve the way we evaluate the changes in soil property, changes in farming conditions, hence in the everyday practice for farmers because their soils have better properties. And now I will conclude telling you that I think as a scientist, as the coordinator of the AJP soil, that carbon farming has the potential to be a success for climate, environment, and farmer. And it has to be very carefully implemented if we want it to be a success. What is needed is an integrative view, not only carbon, not only focus on carbon, but focus on ecosystem services, focus on the different elements, focus on the whole agro-ecosystem, and again, within an agroecology approach. Consider leakage, consider the different trade-offs, and it is actually a whole systems change that is needed. So, but it's also an opportunity, I think, for changes in agriculture nowadays. Results-based schemes are very promising. They have really strength, but it is necessary for that to reduce uncertainty and cost. There's a need for research, but there's also a need, as was said, for a regulatory framework. And I would like to end by saying that farmers are indeed the stewards of land and soil resources. So they have to be actors of the co-construction of carbon farming schemes. And there's a need to have fair and functional tools. And on that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claire. Merci beaucoup. After the next panelist, I will ask you a question on the economic dimension, the slide you started to discuss.
Okay.
So we move to the third panelist, Anne Trombini. So vous êtes de l'ONG pour une agriculture vivante et vous travaillez avec des agriculteurs qui pratiquent le carbon farming et le stockage du carbone. Donc, c'est très intéressant d'avoir là aussi les premières leçons à retirer de ces expériences qui doivent ensuite changer d'échelle pour avoir l'impact qui a été évoqué par Claire sur le potentiel du carbon farming. On en est aujourd'hui évidemment très loin et c'est précisément pour ça qu'on a ce séminaire et qu'on aura les initiatives qui vont suivre. Anne, je vous passe la parole.
Bonjour, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for this invitation today to deliver this keynote that I will share with LULUCF, our scientific coordinator. So my name is Anne Trombini, and I'm the managing director of Agroecology du Vivant, which stands in English for life-intensive agriculture. And we work indeed with the farming and food sector to collectively try to scale up the agroecological transition. So today we would like, after this scientific insight and strategic insight before us, to share with you how the actors in the field see this transition and how they are trying now to convert commitments into actions. And to start this presentation, I'd like to share with you the point of view of a farmer. If the slide wants to move, yes, it's good, thank you. Because at the end of the day, this subject is about farming. So it was really important for us to understand what their point of view is. And for the past 3 years, we've led different studies to try to identify, to start the triggers for an agroecological transition. And what is very interesting is that even though farmers are all different and farms are all different and make different choices, actually all the triggers relate to their day-to-day practices and their day-to-day job. So we identified 3 main triggers for an agroecological transition. The first one is erosion and yield losses. The second one is the need for cost reduction, obviously. As you all know, the current economic situation of farmers, and in particular, the special case of using plow, which costs a huge amount of money in the day-to-day. And the last one is the need for reduction of chemical inputs for general public attention, but mainly for helping the return of life in the fields. What is very interesting also is to analyze the drivers for this transition. So when farmers start the transition in the fields, there are either drivers or barriers that will help or hinder the transition. And as far as the drivers are concerned, usually and quite often it's the economic opportunity that will arise, especially organic certification, which at the moment is the only scheme that brings value to farming sector. And the second one is the reappropriation of agronomic knowledge. And that is a huge and very important point, is that the farmers who start the transition get into a continuous improvement path that bring a lot of intellectual and personal satisfaction in the job. And that is a huge part not to be forgotten in this transition and in the policies we will put in place. Finally, as far as the barriers are concerned, there are 4 main ones. The near environment of the farmers is very, very important, and there is a huge cultural change to bring in the farming sector to help those farmers that go into the transition. The second one is the risk of dogmatism in applying specific techniques and looking at techniques instead of results. And this brings a lot of failure situation. And finally, the lack of technical references and of financial support, obviously, to secure the risks and additional cost of the transition. So actually, when you look at those key points, you will notice that carbon does not appear even once, because carbon is not a starting point for a transition, and is not yet a financial incentive either. So it's definitely something that is looked at as a potential driver, but still yet to be confirmed. And this is really important to remember that. So the question is now, when you see that different farms and different situations have different needs because their soil and their climate and their environment are different, and so farmers have and take different paths into the transition, it's really important to ask ourselves how collectively we can build the tools, we can build the solutions to drive all farmers into this transition. As Claire explained, what is at stake here is to be able to take all farmers into the transition. So what is clear and comes from a general consensus now from all stakeholders, from the supply chain, from farm to fork, is that we absolutely need to move from techniques towards result-based management schemes to bring all farmers into the same direction, one unique direction that will be systemic and will bring all the benefits together and let the farmers choose their own technical decisions. And so based on the observation that in agroecology, everything is linked and it is a system. So we needed a tool that would embrace this complexity of agroecological systems and transition and be a tool, an operational tool that would be used for farmers and technicians for agronomic progress and for economic valorization by supply chains. So I will give you 1 minute of agronomics just to present to you the tool that we build, and which is free and open source and accessible to everyone, which is called the Regeneration Index, to evaluate the level of an agroecological production system. And everything starts with the soil, because the soil is an ecosystem, a living organism, perhaps, and it is the home, at least, of, here you can see earthworms and you can see fungi, which are essential to the soil functioning. So you can see it as the home of organisms that you want to maintain for agricultural production. And this home must be protected from external aggressions such as rain, wind, sun, and so it needs to be protected, and the best protection possible for a soil is plants, whether they are dead or alive, because in addition to this physical protection, they give food to the soil, and this is carbon, and this is what will interest us today. But we do not limit ourselves to the soil, because soils are in an ecosystem. And so apart from these 4 first axes, which are really related to soil, we go beyond and we address the entire agroecosystem because many functions linked to the regulation of pests, that will be linked to the phytosanitary use, or to the microclimate with, for example, agroforestry, which will have huge impacts on crops and on yields, are very important to address. And in the end, this is not complete without the farmer himself. And this is why we have a final, the 8th axis on the training of farmer for agroecology. And so this, you can see that in this 8 axes, there are all the challenges that agriculture faces, whether related to carbon, to biodiversity, to water, etc. And this systemic tool contains in itself, in this systemic vision, indicators that are linked to one or the others of these challenges. And here I will just detail the one of carbon, because we have now a recent study that has been performed by Professor Pascal Boivin, who is a researcher in Geneva, and who showed that on farm, the main drivers of carbon storage in the soil, which is an increase of organic matter in the soil, are first the soil cover, the use of cover crops, and the fact that they produce a large biomass. Second, reduction of tillage, because this is very much linked in farms with the success of cover crops and of soil cover. And third, the application of manure. So this is the 3 determinants. And what is interesting with the tool we built is that while we have this systemic approach and the regeneration index on the 8 axes, inside that we have more particular look at the carbon storage. And so I think this is perhaps my main message today, is that supporting agroecology in its systemic aspect is the only action we need. And when I say we, I mean the policy need to achieve all our common goals that go beyond carbon, because it is not only climate change mitigation, it's also reconquest of biodiversity, improvement of water quality, reduction of chemical inputs, and healthy food production. And agroecology can address all of these challenges. But to do that, we need to go out of the segmentation of agriculture in labels, because we know that sometimes choosing is renouncing. And in farming, we observe that oftentimes farmers that go for example, economic reasons towards organic agriculture have difficulty to store a lot of carbon because they are sometimes enclosed in technical itineraries that are complicated in organic farming. It's complicated to because you are dependent on mechanical, on plowing, for example, or mechanical weeding. And so you have difficulty to store carbon. So today, we should not make farmers choose between using less pesticides or storing carbon. We need to accompany them in a progression that embrace all of that. And this is what we try to do when we support agroecological transition, which is the systemic vision that incorporates not only carbon, but also biodiversity, water, etc.
Thank you. Could I consider that it would be your conclusion or not? Because
one final slide.
Will be
very quick. Because it's really important to talk about the business case to drive this transition. And as far as carbon sequestration is concerned, it's really important to be aware that because of limited lifespan and capacity storage in the soil, carbon cannot be the new business model for farming. So it's obviously really critical to be able to develop a new business model to support this transition. And that's what we've done for the past 3 years. To build a model that first will consider the actual first objective of agriculture, which is growing food, and to have fair remuneration, fair payments for a quality production, but also for the increasing knowledge and the long-term investments that are needed for carbon management. And then carbon management can become like a 13th month pay, but if you don't have the 12-month pay fair, then it will not work. So this is really important to integrate in the business case, the relationship with all the supply chain to be able to build this fair price and this fair remuneration. The second lever that I didn't mention yet is the risk insurance schemes. This is really important, and this is, as far as we're concerned, the role of public policies to play their role in helping farmers, starting with additional costs and risk, and to cover that either with prepayment schemes or with credit taxes, etc. Everything must be invented. And finally, income diversification is really key, because as you have in growing biodiversity as the key driver for resilience in the system, you need to have income diversity as well to build the economic resilience of the farm. So as a conclusion, what is very important for us to tell you today is that we urgently need to agree on a common set of result-based indicators and one current agroecological policy to support this transition and avoid the detrimental trade-offs that we would have with one carbon policy and one biodiversity policy and one soil policy. This is one unique policy that we need to build, and not only at this condition, we can reconcile the 3 objectives of agriculture, which are producing food, producing environmental services, and producing happy farmers. So let's change the day. Let's change the game together.
Thank you. So I'm going to give the floor to the last panelist of the first panel. Then I will open the floor for a few questions, and then we'll go to the second panel very soon. So Margaret Kim from the Gold Standard. So the Gold Standard has a very, very significant experience on what is a good certification and what is not a good certification. So on this basis, what do you have to say on how to deal with it, with the carbon certification properly?
Thank you, Pascal, and thank you for 4 per 1,000 for the invitation to this very valuable discussion. I think my intervention will be a very good transition from policy, science, farmers' insights to innovative practices in the next panel discussion. So for those of you who may not be familiar with us, Gold Standard is a Switzerland-based international standard that provides tools, methodologies, and guidances to ensure high environmental integrity and maximize sustainable development impact in climate protection projects, programs, and funds in both carbon markets and non-market mechanisms. So first, touching on the carbon credit and carbon markets, and I want to elaborate a little bit what Norbert has said, and Christian reiterated, and also Claire also highlighted. There are several core elements or requirements for a carbon credit. So the credit, in order to become a credible carbon credit, the impact has to be real. That the baseline scenario before a project is introduced is accurate. Second, it has to be measurable. So from that baseline, can we accurately measure the change in soil organic carbon sequestration, for example? And another important element is permanence, and Claire also mentioned this earlier. Can we be certain that this carbon will be sequestered for the long term? And we need to remember that when a carbon credit is used for offsetting, that is promising that a ton of CO2 that lives in the atmosphere for hundreds of years has been mitigated. So another important requirement is it has to be independently verified, and my fellow panelists also talked about
indépendante. Mes copanélistes en ont parlé. Ce n'est pas, il faut qu'une tierce partie vérifie l'impact, et ce n'est pas le producteur qui peut l'assurer.
Happened without the incentive of carbon finance. So it's important to remember that carbon credit revenue is a catalyst for change, not a reward for farmers already doing something or for starting to do something well within the reach or is becoming common practice. And I think this is an important element for me to highlight. So given the nature of soil organic carbon, or SOC, there are several challenges to meet these requirements to qualify as carbon credit or for carbon offsetting. And it's important to understand the challenges in order for us to come up with innovative solutions. And one of the challenges, how do we determine real and measurable impact? Currently, there are many proposals focusing on modeling to reduce transaction costs, but these models have limitations. They don't exist everywhere. They are a representation of reality, and in many instances, can fail to account for the great spatial variation of soil organic carbon and for the less than perfect implementation of the project activities. So for example, not all farmers within a project implement activities to the same level of effectiveness. So it might also be the case that models might not be granular enough for the confidence levels required for carbon credit issuance. Second is the infamous topic, permanence. So to be certain that carbon remains sequestered for the long term, farmers must continue the same or even better project activities for decades, so long after they've received the carbon revenue. And to continue practices, farmers need to see tangible benefits arising from the improved practices that this carbon credit projects motivate them to implement. So for example, Claire explained to us in terms of yields. So it would be very challenging to rely on permanence buffers, which a lot of the carbon standards have, to account for any and all soil organic carbon reversals, and especially in this global momentum of market trying to scale. The next challenge is independently verified. We run a methodology and a certification process, but the rigor required for carbon credit means on-site measurement is required, at least to a certain degree, which increases transaction costs to unlock carbon revenue. And finally, additional, if the market does indeed really scale and many farmers are applying improved practices, by definition, this becomes business as usual and probably will not constitute additionality as recognized by Gold Standard or any reputable carbon standards. So currently, Gold Standard has several methodologies for projects that increase carbon stocks. And while it's not impossible to overcome the challenges that I just introduced, we believe we now have a very good opportunity to innovate, to set new standards for incentivizing and rewarding climate smart practices. And Leah and Anne also talked about systematic approach, that the carbon is not the starting point of farmers. So this is exactly the right time for the EU to be maybe a little provocative to break out of the mold that attempts to force fit all types of climate action into a narrow carbon credit use case, and to think in a holistic ways that my previous panelists discussed, that considers more than carbon as the only indicator or value carrier. So what are some of the rewards-based approaches? We at Gold Standard believe that there is a great potential for other incentives, and in addition to carbon markets, there's a lot of emerging practices and pilots. I'll share some of the areas that we're working on, which draw from the core principles of carbon markets. For example, rigor and safeguards, a holistic approach that considers many indicators beyond carbon, like water access, improved livelihoods, conserved biodiversity, that are actually measurable and verifiable to assure real impact. First is putting premium for certified sustainable commodities. So this is companies purchasing these goods through their supply chain, certified to have lower emission factor due to improved agriculture practices, including verified carbon sequestration. And companies can report this in their inventory as per the GHG protocol, and therefore use this to report progress towards the science-based target. And our collaboration, Gold Standard's collaboration with other sustainability standards, the ICO standards like FSC, Better Cotton Initiative, has launched a pilot and to enable this. And second is Christian referred to this in the earlier comment, that using a public and private partnership, and being more specific, using blended finance vehicle that can be deployed for aggregated agricultural interventions using public EU funding, for example, as a first loss, or other de-risking strategies to bring in private sector financing for verified impact claims for not only carbon, but also for other important benefits. So we're very fortunate to be part of an innovative initiative called Subnational Climate Finance Initiative. So I want to give an example of what that blended finance can look like. It's a $750 million fund, private equity fund led by Pegasus Capital, which is a US-based private equity, of which the Green Climate Fund, which is a public finance, has granted first loss capital for private equity investments in small, mid-sized sustainable projects at subnational level. And the reason why I mentioned this model in this context is there's a very important element that's attached to this fund, is a technical assistance facility led by IUCN. It's a global international organization that's leading on nature-based solutions that bring projects online and provide capacity building to ensure their success. So one of the gentlemen from the audience talked about farmers' perspective in Romania. How do we get support on capacity building, training, and consultation? So this kind of technical assistance facility, a public grant, can support these ambitions. And Gold Standard in all of this plays a role to ensure that all projects and the fund itself follow safeguards and quantifies climate and development impact for credible reporting. And
that's just your conclusion.
So one point I think Claire highlighted and Anne and Leah shared is that in these discussions, it's important that we hear directly from farmers, and engaging farmers in a meaningful way can also help us to inform capacity building efforts that can increase the likelihood of buy-in and long-term success of carbon farming frameworks. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I will invite the participants, and we are 146, to raise their questions on the chat. I will raise the first question. That's my privilege. Then if there are other MEPs willing to have the floor, please just signal yourself, and Norbert, please do so, of course, if you want to raise a question. So my question would be to Claire. on the economic, let's say even financial dimension of the carbon price, you need to be able to reward the change of practices that would lead itself to a better carbon storage under the criteria set by Margaret, for instance. So which kind of price are we talking about? Whether it is a market price or it is a peer-to-peer, I would say, contract and a voluntary price paid by company XYZ, but which level of price are we talking about to justify for a farmer to change its practice to store more carbon?
Okay, thank you, Pascal. Well, whether it's market price or through something like the label bas carbone with an entity that finances the carbon to be stored, I do not know. What I know is that the additional, you also asked what were the additional costs. Well, for example, if you implement cover crops, you have to buy the seeds, you have additional runs with your tractor. So it is fuel, it means time. And for me, this is really the minimum. It is not rewarding. It is just paying for what has been done. So for me to be interesting, to be fair, the payment of farmers in the carbon farming system should go beyond that, and also, for example, account for the time for training, for knowledge acquisition. And Leah talked about it takes time, and you need to get more knowledge. You need additional advice also. And so all this needs to be accounted. If you just compensate for the additional cost, okay, it's not incitative.
Of course. And then how much are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm not competent. So no, I'm not competent. So I would say okay, I'm not. Maybe Anne and Leah, they're okay, on the, yeah, they know more.
Okay,
yeah,
so
point of view.
If I can give you an insight, we are working on modeling the economic cost of the transition. And what is very clear is that there is no answer to your question, because there is not one unique situation. Every farm is different. So even with the supply chain, when we're working on, it's more about having common objectives and negotiating common value for the quality, the overall holistic quality of what is being done. But giving a price based on the cost, it's totally impossible. So this is not how we try to build it with the supply chains. We really try to look at the risks and obviously some additional costs, but it's more like what is the contributing capacity of the supply chain and what seems feasible and reasonable, fair for the farmer. And then we try to build something. And maybe in a few years' time, when this will be more and more common, we will achieve something that will be more like a standard. But at the moment, it's totally impossible to answer your question. And I'm sorry about that.
Okay, but it's obvious that we will have to have an answer on that, yes, and yes, the Commission will need also to jump in. I don't know, Norbert, would you like to have the floor?
Yes, just quickly. Thank you, Pascal. Just a short question, maybe to Margaret. We talked about permanence, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, because I think people will have this question of permanence. How can we guarantee this to secure lasting the climate action? Maybe yeah, you can elaborate a little bit more about this.
So as a global climate standard, we have something called a buffer, so permanence buffer. So if there's a reversal of the project along the way, then this buffer gets triggered. But this is a very tricky one, because in a small scale projects, the buffer is effective. But as we scale, because clearly the carbon farming, it has to be taking the aggregational approach. So as it scales, basically the amount of responsibility that can be held by the buffer becomes very risky. So to me, this is a $1 million question that probably not only the standards or buyers, but also financial community through insurance or some financial instrument to support. Otherwise, permanence is, as I said, it's one of the main challenges of carbon farming projects.
Thank you. Do we have other MEPs willing to ask questions? I don't think so.
Pascal, juste un mot.
Yeah. Stéphane.
Pour ta question, elle est directement liée à deux choses. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez faire avec le marché du carbone? Est-ce que c'est un marché avec des échanges peer-to-peer, comme tu disais, c'est-à-dire des quotas qui sont achetés par des partenaires privés, ou est-ce que c'est un marché qui peut aussi avoir un fonds public qui puisse être utilisé ensuite pour des politiques d'amélioration des stratégies de stockage ou voire d'innovation dans les process de production? Si on est dans le deuxième cas, il faut partir de choses simples. Je connais l'agriculture et la PAC et tout ça par cœur. Chose simple, il faut repérer les 3 critères qui sont fondamentaux pour éviter de relarguer du carbone dans l'atmosphère. C'est la durée. Quand tu commences un processus, il faut qu'il dure. Et donc là, il y a une question qui est posée sur le lien qu'on doit avoir avec des aides et le maintien du stockage prairie permanente, comme on a commencé à le faire dans la PAC. Deuxième critère, couverture des sols. Ça, c'est un critère simple. Il n'a pas été pris suffisamment en compte dans la nouvelle PAC. C'est très clairement, il y a une étude anglaise qui est sortie qui dit que le fait de ne pas labourer te fait gagner 20 à 30% d'émissions en moins. Protoxyde d'azote, carbone, tout ce que tu veux. C'est un principe. Donc, le lien entre ce que tu disais, le contrat avec les agriculteurs pour financer les transitions, il faut partir de choses très simples. Troisième grand principe, troisième grand critère, premier, durée, 2, couverture de sol, 3, niveau de biodiversité. Là, il est très variable selon les écosystèmes et les situations pédoclimatiques. Donc là, c'est par grande zone que tu peux définir des niveaux de biodiversité qui nécessitent à ce moment-là, s'ils sont atteints, des aides spécifiques. Je pense que la vraie question maintenant, pour répondre à ta question, est-ce que les agriculteurs vont directement participer à un marché du carbone difficile pour eux d'être capables d'acheter ou de prouver qu'ils stockent? Par contre, la politique publique, et c'est ce que tu évoquais, Pascal, doit aller vers un système contractuel, durée, couverture des sols, biodiversité.
Merci. Et effectivement, le fonctionnement actuel du marché du carbone, c'est précisément les deux. Il y a soit des échanges directs sur le marché, soit, enfin, les deux existent, soit des financements publics via des mécanismes de type, dans le marché actuel, fonds de modernisation, fonds d'innovation. Et c'est précisément ce qu'on pourrait imaginer dupliquer avec les agriculteurs sur le carbone si on décide d'aller dans cette direction. Et c'est là où la question du coût et du prix entre en jeu, parce que avant de passer la parole aux exemples concrets qui vont peut-être nous éclairer aussi sur les modèles économiques, quand Christiane de la Commission nous dit que Corsia peut être un marché pour le crédit carbone pour les agriculteurs, moi personnellement, j'ai des gros doutes puisque les crédits carbone de Corsia, c'est vendu à 1 €. Je ne vois pas ce qu'un agriculteur peut faire à 1 € la tonne de CO2 évitée. Donc, à ce niveau, à titre personnel, je pense qu'on raconte une histoire qui n'a aucune chance de se produire. Et donc, c'est très important de savoir dans quel niveau de prix on doit se situer pour que, à un moment donné, il y ait une dynamique économique qui fonctionne dans la diversité des modèles pédoclimatiques, dans la diversité des exploitations, etc., etc. Mais on sait très bien, par exemple, pour les industries, que quand on arrive là où on est maintenant à 50, 60, 70, 80 € la tonne de CO2, beaucoup de modèles basculent. En revanche, il y a encore d'autres changements qui se font à 200, 300 € la tonne de CO2. Cela, on n'y est pas du tout et il est probable que le prix du carbone n'atteigne jamais ces niveaux, en tout cas pas dans la décennie clé, qui est celle qui s'ouvre. Donc, c'est important qu'à un moment donné, on puisse modéliser cela pour le carbon farming, pour savoir où on se situe.
Perhaps just one very quick addition on the carbon prices. It is one thing to say that the higher the carbon price will be, the more farmers will be inclined to have practices that store carbon. Then what is the use of having a carbon market for farmers and not supporting cover crops in the CAP, for example? This is two opposite policies, while perhaps supporting the implantation of cover crops in the CAP perhaps would already do the job that we want to be done with
pourrait faire le travail que l'on veut faire avec le marché.
Thank you very much. So we move now to the two last interventions. So the first one coming from Greenback, the CEO is Quentin Sagnier. The second one from Indigo, the CEO is Georg Gores. Sorry for maybe if the name is badly put. So Quentin, the floor is yours to start with and to share with us what would be your own solution to contribute to solve the challenges we have identified.
Okay, thank you, Pascal. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Greenback, and Greenback is the first soil rating agency. So how to make agriculture an environmental contributor? If we want to make carbon farming a success for climate, environment, and farmer, at least two main issues must be fixed. The first one is the lack of knowledge on environmental impact of farming practices. Say, yes, we can deliver a few good principles, but the problem has to be considered farm by farm, system by system. So most of the actors in agriculture value chains, from farmers to biosource industry, are blind on the impact of their decisions on environment, their decision of procurement or practices on environment. Along the past 50 years, the holistic impact of farming practices, including in organic agriculture, was not considered and was not monitored. So agriculture is over-regulated on practices today, but never on impact. So the first point is to be able to measure the real environmental impact of any farming practices on any kind of soil in any pedological context. And obviously, a carbon stock improvement cannot be valued against a degradation on biodiversity or an increase of pollution. So if we are building carbon farming policy, and if we are expecting benefits for climate, environment, and farmers as well, we cannot build this policy without this knowledge. We cannot as well be carbon only. We must integrate, we are many to say that, biodiversity, of course, and pollution as well. And the carbon farming should take into account the specificity of farming impact. A plot is not a forest. The permanence in agriculture is not the permanence in a forest. So at Greenback, we have decided 3 years ago to measure this environmental impact of agriculture through the real measure of soil health. So with scientific partners, we have developed a methodology to measure the impact of farming practices on biodiversity with a DNA approach, on carbon with a technique coming from the petroleum exploration, and on pollution. So this methodology is based on sampling, on real sampling on the field, and lab analysis, because the development of the knowledge cannot be constituted solely from modeling. We need to prove and to assess the real impact we have. So we are measuring, and we are rating because it's necessary to rate to be able to compare the impact on any kind of soil. So our goal is to provide the farmers, the food industry, any actors in agricultural value chain with a solution to measure the impact and to enlighten their decision, their procurement or their practices decision. So this is the knowledge is the first problem. The second issue, there is no agricultural transition without a new business model. So obviously, a carbon market is a huge opportunity to finance change in agriculture, but it is not enough. Agriculture, it's still at this point an environmental program, and agriculture cannot be the global greenwashing machine for the rest of the industry. So the new business model should encourage all the actors in the value chain to give their preference for environmental positive impact. And we propose that this impact should be measured through the soil health. So we believe that we can collectively build a new efficient and positive agriculture based on transparency on soil health and knowledge on the impact of agricultural practices. So after 3 years and 15 pilot projects, mainly in Europe, so we are starting our first contracts with wine and spirit company and a big cooperative to monitor progressively the soil of 6,000 farms in Europe, to manage a transition, to value their crop from healthy soil, to edit carbon and biodiversity credits based on the improvement on soil health. And to conclude, just a last sentence, the agricultural carbon farming market risks being nothing but a flash in the pan if it does not include biodiversity and real impact measures. Existing carbon market standards have to be reinvented. Definitely, it is an existing challenge, exciting challenge, sorry, for the European Union.
Thank you. And of course, if you could share with us in the chat links to your results and your notation and rating, that would be very valuable. I now give the floor to the last panelist, and we are close to the end of this webinar. Mr. Gures, the floor is yours.
Yeah, let me just share my screen quickly. So first of all, thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Georg Gures. I'm the head of Europe for Indigo Agriculture. And I would like to thank quickly, of course, first Norbert Linz and also Pascal Confin for giving us the opportunity to address the audience today. So as many people might know, that Indigo is a US-based company, and we have started a carbon program in practice already, and have a lot of customers sign up, and I will share some details on this in a minute. Before I do this, I would like to quickly pick up on some of the themes which have been shared before. So we fully agree that carbon farming can be a solution, an important solution in the contribution to fight climate change, and we believe that the natural carbon sink available through carbon farming is of course extremely important. It is scalable, affordable, and immediately available, as we've been clearly hearing today as well. Now, when I look forward, and this is interesting, I felt it interesting in the discussion also what Claire presented, and we know there are different views on the effects of the different activities. So in our view, we summarize it in 5 key practices which make a big difference in helping to sequester carbon in the soil. One of which I think everybody agreed on is the cover crops. And then we have data and see this also from studies that a no tillage or minimum tillage practice is also very important. Now, we've seen different data today, and I think this is important that we all find a common view on this over time. Because it is important when you want to calculate the carbon which really has been sequestered in the soil. Crop rotations, extended crop rotations, reduced inputs of mineral fertilizer was discussed, and we are fully in the same camp. And then, of course, we have, if possible, you can include and incorporate livestock on the farm, which is not possible in all countries, of course, as we know. So, and then the benefits we discussed, and I think this is also important that we do not only focus on the carbon price. I think the revenue stream generated through the selling of the carbon credit is extremely important and is a source of income for the farmer and should be going forward. So we are fully behind that. But there are the additional benefits, and I think Claire also alluded to this. That there is certainly, you have a higher organic matter in your soil. You see that there is an improved drought tolerance in the soil. There is a better improved infiltration and reduced erosion. So you have a better soil structure. And coming to the yield stability, we also see that farmers who are applying regenerative practices since a while and have a high humus content and carbon content, that they have more stable yields, because in difficult years when there is drought and or flooding, then there is, of course, we see that the yields are more stable than with perhaps soils which are not as healthy. Quickly, how is the Indigo program working and what are we doing? We summarize this in 8 steps. So there is a farmer who basically says, so this is now really the practical example of how such a solution is brought to the market. The farmer registers with us. They make the plan of what additional activities that they're going to do on which field. Then they implement these practice changes, and then we collect the data, which the grower basically submits to us, which is then used as evidence to prove that the practice changes have been implemented. Now, then that's where Indigo comes into place. We've been so far partnering with the CAR methodology and the Vera VCS standards, the Verified Carbon Standard, which are basically then the methodologies which help us to clearly define what activities have to be taken. So that data will then be modeled first and quantified and is then given to the verifiers, which will issue the carbon credits, which Indigo is then basically selling to interested buyers, which was also debated earlier in the discussion. Many companies have in their ESG targets, and I think Margaret also referred to this, have the targets to reduce the carbon footprint. And so there's a significant demand in there, which we see, and then we pass on the proceeds for those sales to the farmer. So in principle, you can see that there's a dual benefit. One of which is that the farmer does get more resilient soils, and with this, I think is better equipped for any weather patterns which might be challenging. And in addition, they can have an additional income stream through the proceeds of the sale of the carbon credits. Absolutely key to all of this, and that's, as I think Norbert opened it as well in his remark, I think it is important that it's a verified carbon credit, so it has to have a very registry approved methodology, which is critical for the credibility. It needs to be real, so the activities really need to take place, and we need to be able to prove this at any time. It needs to be additional activities which would have not been done otherwise without entering into this activity. And then the permanence issue is, of course, a very important factor. We need to make sure that, and I felt there were very good comments also in the chat today on this, that we need to get a public opinion view on the importance of the role. The last slide, quickly, just to give you a view on, because we said, can we get this off the ground and can we work with farmers and the motivation for change? In the US, we launched the program in summer 2019. We've enrolled by now 1 million hectares worth of farmers in the program, and we do our very first verification of the data from the harvest for the carbon farming as we speak, and so we expect to have the first carbon credits issued, soil-based carbon credits issued very shortly, which of course would be a major step forward in agriculture. In Europe, we have just started this spring with a partnership with Beiselen in Germany, where we do a pilot, which we are basically expanding thereafter. So we started with the first farmers, so it's relatively small still, but we want to make sure that we understand the necessities as well in the European market, because of course climate is different, soil is different, crops are different, and planting practices are not the same as in the US, so we need to locally adopt. And we also have started a partnership with Vasa, which is from the Barilla Group, because they are actually also very interested, again, to Margaret's point earlier, in reducing their Scope 3 emissions and looking at the greenhouse gas reduction and how can they, in the rye production, have a lower greenhouse gas rye footprint when they move forward. Last but not least, we have just signed a partnership agreement with the International Finance Corporation yesterday. I've announced this yesterday for Ukraine, where we also start now looking into what other, how could the carbon farming program look in the Ukraine. And we have also started to do a farmer demonstration project with Agriland in Belgium, so close to Brussels, so that people can really go and educate themselves and have a debate for this. So this is in a quick summary in the time I had available what Indigo is doing today, and I'm of course very happy to take follow-up questions or if people have questions afterwards in the dialogue. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we won't have that much time, unfortunately, for questions. But there were questions asked to the panelists, and some panelists we answered to the chat directly. So, I mean, there were dialogues and living discussions on the chat, which is exactly what it is made for. So thank you very much for your time today to all of you. Special thanks again for Stéphane Le Foll to co-organize with me this webinar, and to Norbert Linz. Norbert, you will have the final word in 1 second. So very happy to move this agenda forward and to collectively answer the questions and the challenges we are facing entering into this new sequence where we are trying to build things seriously regarding carbon farming. And that's, to my view at least, quite brand new at the European scale. So Norbert, the final word for you.
Yes, thank you very much, Pascal. I will be very very brief. Thank you. Thank to all participants for this important discussion. I think we learned a lot today, and I would like to repeat what Anne says, and at the end, I hope we can agree on this. We have to produce happy farmers, and I sometimes of the opinion that this is often not the case today, and there we have to guarantee an integrative view, not to concentrate only on one instrument, so to discuss it with a holistic approach. So I think that is what I learned today. Thank you very much, and thanks especially to Pascal that I could participate this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. So see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks. Next time, Glasgow.